It was the scarf that made her stop. Not the tracks. Not the crackle on the radio. Not even the fact that a wild animal was standing 30 yards from her lookout tower, broad-chested, scarred, and still as stone. No. It was the red wool scarf. Wrapped gently, clumsily, around the bear's neck. Frayed. Worn. Familiar. She'd seen it before. Folded in a plastic evidence bag. Pulled from the snow, years ago. The only thing they ever found of her sister. Mara didn't breathe. Didn't blink. The bear stared back at her. And for the first time since that winter, she whispered the name out loud. Tess. The bear didn't move. But something in the air did. Like time unraveling. Like silence remembering. The scarf had been missing for 12 years. Folded once, tucked into the collar of Tess Keene's favorite navy coat, it was last seen on a frozen January afternoon, the day she told her sister Mara she was going for just one last walk before the storm rolled in. She never came back. They searched for a week. Helicopters. Dogs. Park volunteers. Then the snow came hard and deep. By the time it melted, they found only 3 things. A shallow impression in the moss. A pocket notebook soaked beyond recovery. And the red wool scarf. It had been twisted around the branch of a pine tree. Not torn. Not tossed. But knotted. With care. As if someone had hung it deliberately. Everyone had their theory. Tess fell. Tess froze. Tess ran. But not Mara. Mara knew something didn't make sense. Because Tess had left a note in that ruined notebook, a single page legible by luck alone. He's not what they think he is. No one ever explained what she meant. No one ever found a body. And eventually, they stopped looking. Except Mara. 12 years later, Mara Keene was still working the same woods, a forest ranger for Stone Ridge Preserve, patrolling the same trails her sister once walked. Everyone said it was unhealthy. Morbid. Obsessive. She called it loyalty. That morning, she hadn't expected anything unusual. Her radio had buzzed to life at 6:42 a.m., dispatch forwarding a call from a seasoned hiker named Ben Lawton. His message was simple, scratchy with static. Saw a bear about half-mile from Whistler's Fork. Big. Scar on shoulder. But, weird thing, had a scarf on. Red one. Mara had stood frozen in the ranger cabin. Say that again? A scarf, the man repeated. Like, an actual human scarf. Thought it was a hallucination at first. Her hand tightened around the mic. Did you see where it went? Just stood there. Stared at me. Then walked west, back into the snow. She wrote down the location, told him to stay put, and grabbed her pack before anyone else in the station could stop her. Whistler's Fork was remote, not an official trail, just a finger of flattened ground between ridges, used mostly by deer and the occasional snowshoer. The forest there was denser, quieter, and, in her mind, closer to the truth. It took her an hour to reach the location. At first, she found only old tracks, no fresh prints, no visible scarf. The wind had picked up again, blowing powder into the hollows. She moved slowly, methodically. And then, at the edge of the clearing near the ridge's drop-off, he appeared. No sound. No warning. Just there. He stood massive and still, brown fur grizzled with age, a scar running down his left shoulder, long and pale like a memory. But what held her breath in her throat was what hung around his neck. The red scarf. Same fabric. Same length. Frayed ends. She'd know it anywhere. Her knees went weak. She hadn't seen that scarf in over a decade, not since the investigation box was sealed and returned to her after the case was closed. She'd buried it in the bottom drawer of her closet. But it wasn't in that drawer anymore. She stepped forward once. The bear didn't move. Didn't run. Didn't growl. He just watched her. Unblinking. Like he remembered something, too. Mara felt her training whispering in the back of her mind, never approach a stationary bear, back away slowly, maintain eye contact without showing challenge. But she couldn't move. Not away. Not yet. The wind pulled gently at the scarf. It fluttered against his fur. She took another step forward. Softly. Carefully. And then, with her voice shaking, Tess. The name cracked like dry wood. The bear's ears flicked. Not startled. Not aggressive. Just aware. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. She knew that. And yet, somehow, in a way that logic couldn't hold, she knew it was connected. If not the bear, then the scarf. If not the scarf, then the place. If not the place, then the silence between them. The bear turned slowly. Took 3 steps toward the trees. Then stopped. Looked back. A test. An invitation. Or maybe both. Mara's breath caught. If she stepped forward now, she wasn't just following a lead. She was following a story that no one else believed. One that had started 12 years ago in a swirl of snow and a girl who never came home. She adjusted her pack strap. Stepped forward. And followed. Mara's boots crunched softly through the crusted snow, each step careful, deliberate. The bear moved ahead of her at a slow pace, not lumbering as she expected, but gliding, heavy yet graceful. His bulk wove between the trees like he'd done it 1,000 times. He didn't look back again. He didn't need to. She was following. Not out of curiosity. But out of something deeper, a pull in her ribs, ancient and specific. Something she couldn't name but couldn't ignore. Like muscle memory from a dream she never remembered having. They moved without sound between the trees. No birds. No wind. No distant snapping twigs. Only the shifting whisper of snow falling from branches under the weight of time. She glanced down often, checking for prints, terrain, signals of direction. The trail wasn't marked, and more than once she almost lost him entirely as he disappeared between the undergrowth and shallow slopes. But each time, just when she feared the silence would win, she'd spot the flicker of the red scarf swaying between the pines. It didn't make sense. None of this did. A scarf doesn't stay intact after 12 winters. A bear doesn't let it remain tied. A predator doesn't lead a human anywhere. And yet, here she was. Walking behind a creature that should not care. But clearly did. 20 minutes passed before the terrain changed. The woods dipped suddenly into a narrow ravine, not deep, but steep-walled and slick with compact snow. The bear paused at the lip, then slipped down the slope in 3 practiced movements. Mara followed, bracing herself as she half slid down, her gloved hand skimming the dirt wall to slow her momentum. When she reached the bottom, the air felt different. Colder. Not in temperature, in history. A shallow stream lay ahead, frozen over, its surface etched with small cracks and old deer prints. The bear crossed without hesitation, paws thudding lightly over the ice. Mara followed, her eyes scanning everything. Something about this place was wrong. Or maybe not wrong, just untouched. She realized, with a shiver, that this wasn't part of any known trail. Not a single blaze mark. No ranger flagging. No boot prints. It was as if this part of the forest had been folded over, left out of time. On the far side of the stream, she spotted it. Carved into a half-rotted tree stump. TK Red Heart MK, the initials she and Tess had carved when they were girls. She stumbled forward, breath caught. I remember this. They had been 8 and 10, cheeks red from laughter and cold, daring each other to write something in the tree. Tess had insisted on putting a heart instead of a simple plus. It's not math, she'd said. It's memory. Mara hadn't been back to that spot in over a decade. She thought the path had overgrown or been destroyed. But it hadn't. It had just been hidden. The bear waited near the stump, unmoving. Mara approached slowly. She crouched beside the carving, touched the worn wood, and then turned to face the bear again. You brought me here, she whispered. He said nothing. Did nothing. But the snow between them stayed untouched, like neither one was trespassing. Just returning. She stood and scanned the area. To her left, a narrow incline rose between two large boulders. And just beyond that, the faint outline of something man-made, a structure, collapsed and buried beneath moss and old snow. She moved toward it, heart thumping faster. It had once been a shelter. A lean-to, maybe. Built long ago. Too small for camping. Too crude for logging. It wasn't something the rangers had built. No record of this existed. But she knew who had used it. Tess. She stepped closer. A tattered canvas bag lay half-frozen beneath a rotted log beam. She pulled it loose carefully, shaking off the snow. Inside, a rusted whistle. A small plastic comb. And a photo. Faded. Water-stained. But still visible. It showed two girls, arms around each other, standing beside the very carving in the tree. She blinked. They were older in the photo than the day they carved it. That meant this wasn't from childhood. This was from later. Maybe right before Tess vanished. She held the photo to her chest. Something broke quietly inside her. Not pain. Not joy. But a deep, aching recognition. She hadn't known her sister came back here. Not after high school. Not after the arguments. Not after she drifted. But she had. And now, so had Mara. She turned back to the bear. He was still near the stream, still watching. And now she noticed something else. The scarf, it wasn't just wrapped around his neck. It was tied in the exact knot Tess used to make when they were kids. Looped once, then twisted back through, hanging slightly off-center. No one else would have tied it like that. Not a hunter. Not a prankster. Not time. Tess had tied it. But how? When? Before she disappeared? After? Was it a message? A gift? A claim? Or was the bear waiting? Mara walked back across the stream slowly. When she reached him, he turned again, this time more deliberately, and began to walk once more uphill toward the ridgeline. Not fast. Not forceful. But guiding. She didn't speak. She just followed. Because the trail might not be on the map. But it was written in memory. And he was showing her the way. The climb wasn't steep, but it demanded every breath Mara had. Her boots sank into old snow crusted over with pine needles, and the wind curled between the trees like it knew secrets she didn't. The bear moved ahead of her, slow and steady, never once breaking the rhythm. Every few dozen yards, he'd pause, not looking back, not making a sound, just long enough to let her catch up. And then he'd move again. There was a patience to him. Not like an animal leading by instinct. Like a guide waiting for the moment she was ready. The ridge wasn't on any map Mara had ever seen. It curved east, then bent sharply west, like a scar across the hillside. The pines here were taller, tighter. Their trunks darker. Older. And beneath them, the snow looked different. Untouched. Undisturbed. But it wasn't empty. Not at all. As she crested the slope, the bear came to a full stop. Mara stepped up beside him. And gasped. Below them was a hollowed basin, rimmed by frost-covered boulders, and blanketed in deep, undisturbed snow. But scattered across its surface were items, partially buried, softened by time, but unmistakable. A rusted thermos. A wool glove, fingers curled. A pair of cracked sunglasses. A child's red mitten. All positioned intentionally, not dropped in panic, not scattered randomly. They were placed. Arranged in a circle, each item pointing inward, like the petals of some forgotten ritual. And in the very center, nestled deep into the ground. A scarf. Not the one the bear wore. Another one. Smaller. Frayed differently. The twin. Mara's hands trembled. She knew those scarves. She and Tess had both been given one by their grandmother when they were 9 and 11, so you'll always know where the other is, the old woman had said. Even when the snow comes. Tess had lost hers. Or so they thought. But here it was. Preserved. Protected. As if someone had been guarding it. Mara stepped slowly into the basin, the bear remaining at the rim. She knelt beside the scarf. Lifted it gently from the snow. It was stiff, but whole. The initials TK were stitched faintly into the corner. She pressed it to her chest. Closed her eyes. Breathed. Something about the place was different. Not just eerie or quiet, alive. As if the forest held its breath here. As if time had creased at this very spot. She turned slowly, looking at the circle of objects. They weren't all Tessa's. Some were older. Others newer. Items from different decades, maybe even generations. Mementos. Offerings. Evidence. She didn't know what to call them, but she understood the message. This place mattered. To someone. To him. She looked up toward the bear. He hadn't moved. But his eyes were fixed on her. And for the first time, she didn't see wildness in them. She saw recognition. Mara scanned the area again, heart racing with something she couldn't explain. Her hand brushed the snow to one side, and she found it. A shallow carving in the rock. 4 simple lines. He stayed when no one else did. Below it, a symbol, a simple etching of a bear. Her breath caught. Tess had left this. She must have. The handwriting, the rhythm of the phrase, it was her. Mara remembered it from the notes Tess used to leave in her lunchboxes growing up. Always poetic. Always a little sad. But this one. It wasn't for Mara. It was for him. She stood, scarf in hand, and walked back toward the bear. When she reached him, he didn't flinch. She raised the scarf and, for a brief moment, considered tying it beside the other. But something stopped her. She folded it instead. placed it gently in the snow at his feet. The bear looked down, then up, held her gaze, and for the first time moved closer. Not with force, but with intention. He brushed past her, slowly, and walked into the trees beyond. Mara turned, startled. Wait. He paused. Looked back. It wasn't a challenge. It was an invitation. Again. She looked once more at the basin behind her. At the circle of forgotten things. At the scarf she'd returned. Then she followed. They walked deeper into the forest, the light dimming above them as the ridge narrowed. And then, without warning, they entered a clearing unlike any she'd seen before. Dead center stood a tree, enormous, twisted, ancient. Bark stripped in a spiral. At its base, claw marks. Deep. Etched in layers, some newer, some older. A story told by scratching. Told by a bear. Mara approached the tree slowly. Ran her fingers over the marks. And found a name, barely legible, carved between the gashes. Tess. She looked at him. You've been watching it all this time. The bear blinked. She crouched and touched the soil. Soft. Still warm beneath the snow. He stayed when no one else did, she whispered. And finally, she understood. Mara sat with her back to the tree, the spiral-grooved bark rough against her jacket, the claw marks cold under her fingertips. Her breath curled in front of her like smoke. The bear lay at the edge of the clearing, half in shadow, half in light, his massive head resting on his paws. Neither of them moved. The world had narrowed to this place. And somehow, it didn't feel like a discovery. It felt like a return. She reached into her jacket and pulled out the old photo she'd found back at the lean-to. She studied it again. Two girls, arms around each other. A time before everything had cracked. Tessa's eyes held that look, wild, sharp, like she already knew something she wasn't ready to say out loud. Mara ran her thumb across her sister's face. The wind whispered through the trees, soft as breath. I wish you'd told me, she murmured. Whatever this was, whatever you found. I would have come with you. She looked up at the bear. He was watching her again. Not with fear. Not with threat. But with knowing. That same steady look she'd seen the first moment on the ridge, like he recognized her. Not just as a ranger. Not just as a human. As hers. Tessa's sister. The girl who used to follow her down trails and hold her hand during thunderstorms and beg her to stay just a little longer when the world felt too fast. I think you kept her safe, Mara said aloud, not sure who she was talking to anymore, the bear, the trees, herself. I think, maybe she wasn't lost at all. She folded the photo carefully and slid it back into her jacket. Then stood. There was a path behind the tree, not obvious, not cleared, but present. Subtle. Flattened snow. Broken moss. It curved away from the basin like a ribbon tucked beneath the forest's breath. The bear rose. Took one step toward it. And waited. Mara followed. The two of them moved silently for 10 minutes. The sun began to tilt lower, light slanting between trees, golden and pale. The trail dipped slightly, revealing the edges of a half-frozen pond, barely visible behind reeds and scrub. And then she saw it. The cabin. Small. Hidden. Half buried by a leaning cedar and masked by drifts. But intact. Its roof bowed under snow. Its window fogged. A single rusted tin chimney punched out of the top. Her legs nearly gave out. She hadn't known this existed. No record. No structure marked. Yet here it was. Like it had always been waiting. The bear stopped several feet from the door and lowered himself slowly to the snow. Not resting. Not guarding. Allowing. Mara stepped forward. The wood groaned beneath her boots as she approached. The door hung slightly crooked on its hinges. She reached out. Pushed. It creaked open. The air that spilled out smelled of pine resin, mold, and something faintly sweet, like forgotten tea. Inside, a single room. One cot, half collapsed. A stove in the corner. Shelves built from mismatched boards. And on those shelves, jars. Dozens of them. Labeled in careful handwriting. Chaga, steep 3 minutes. Sweet birch sap. Mint, forest. Bare root, don't overuse. And on the table, a notebook. She stepped inside. The bear remained outside, unmoving. She picked up the notebook. Opened it. Inside, page after page of handwriting. Neat. Familiar. Tessa's. It's not loneliness. Not really. It's something else. Like the forest is holding its breath and I'm the only one who can hear it. He came again today. Same time. Same way. He never makes noise. But he always looks me in the eye like he's remembering someone. I think he's staying because I'm the only one who didn't treat him like a monster. Because I didn't run. They wouldn't understand. That's okay. Some bonds don't need to be named. Mara sank slowly into the corner chair, hand over her mouth. Tess hadn't vanished. She'd left. On purpose. Not to disappear. But to become part of something else. Something older. Wilder. Quieter. The last page had no writing. Just a single drawn image, a bear and a girl, both lying beneath a pine tree, their backs touching. No faces. No names. Just closeness. Mara closed the notebook. Stepped back out onto the snow. The bear was still waiting. She approached slowly and knelt beside him. "Thank you," she said. Her voice cracked. "Thank you for staying." He blinked slowly, then shifted his gaze toward the western slope, where the last of the light was bleeding into the horizon. It was almost dusk. Time to go. She reached into her pack. Pulled out a scarf. Not red. Navy blue, her own. She tied it gently around a low tree limb near the cabin door. A marker. A memory. Not for others to find. But for the forest to keep. The bear rose again. Took one slow step west. Then another. And then, without sound, disappeared between the trees. She didn't follow. Not this time. Some goodbyes didn't need words. Some truths didn't need explanation. They just needed to be felt. And carried. Mara didn't rush. She didn't take out her GPS. She didn't log coordinates or pin locations or radio in her status. For once, she wasn't a ranger tracing a perimeter or a sister chasing a ghost. She was someone returning from a place she was never meant to find. And that made the walk down the ridge feel heavier, not with dread, but with meaning. The bear hadn't looked back again. But she didn't need him to. Everything she'd found at the cabin, Tessa's notes, the circle of offerings in the basin, the tree scarred with claw and memory, it all pointed to one impossible conclusion. Her sister hadn't died. At least not in the way they'd assumed. Tess had chosen silence. Chosen solitude. chosen to live in a space where no one expected explanations. And somehow, through time, snow, and seasons, a bear had been part of that. A protector. A witness. Maybe even a friend. The sun dipped lower as Mara reached the carved stump, TK Red Heart MK, the carving they'd made as kids. She touched it again. This time, the wood didn't feel sad. It felt solid. Known. The wind picked up slightly. She turned and followed the ridge path back toward Whistler's Fork, where her snow tracks still lingered. But as she walked, her thoughts shifted, no longer about where Tess had been, but about why she'd stayed. She reached the edge of the ravine by late afternoon. The sky was shifting pink behind the treetops. Her radio buzzed. She'd almost forgotten she'd left it on. The voice on the other end crackled through. "Ranger Keene, you still up on the ridge? Got some chatter back here, tourists claiming they saw a bear with a scarf. Over by Creek Trail now. Another sighting. A different location. Far from the basin. Far from the cabin." Mara hesitated before replying. Then pressed the mic. "Copy that. I'll check the report tomorrow." A pause on the line. "You sure? Could be worth following up tonight." She stared at the trees ahead. "No," she said gently. "He's already headed home." She shut the radio off. Let the forest settle again. By dusk, she reached the ranger station. It looked the same, the logs stained by years of sun, the tools lined up by the shed, the truck parked beneath the cedar that always dropped too much sap. But it felt smaller now. Like the rest of the world had shrunk just slightly while the forest had expanded. Like there were places she now carried in her chest that no map could contain. Inside the cabin, she lit the wood stove, hung up her coat, and stood staring at the board where she and the other rangers tracked sightings, bears, mountain lions, poachers, snowshoers. The line next to a bear ridge sector was blank. She reached for the marker and simply wrote. Observed. Calm. Marked. Scar on left shoulder. No mention of the scarf. No mention of the cabin. Just the facts and a silent agreement between her and the woods. She pulled the twin scarf from her pack, the one Tess had kept, and set it on the table. Then opened her own field notebook. She didn't start with coordinates. She didn't start with dates. She wrote one sentence. There are truths only the forest can explain. And then another. She was never lost. She was always exactly where she meant to be. Outside, snow began to fall again. Light. Quiet. Soft as breath. That night, she dreamed of the bear. But not as a threat. Not even as a memory. He stood beside her on the ridge, looking out over the basin, both of them silent, the air full of unspoken things. In the dream, she turned to him and asked, "Did she stay because of you?" But he didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because the scarf wasn't tied to him anymore. It was folded gently beside a circle of pine cones, and Tess was sitting there, smiling softly, like she'd just finished telling a story only the forest had listened to. When Mara woke, the world felt different. Not changed. Not healed. But quietly rearranged. Later that morning, a junior ranger named Joel tapped on her office door. "Hey, got a weird report from a kid out hiking with his dad." "What kind of report?" she asked without looking up. Joel shrugged. Said he saw a bear. Big one. With 2 scarves. Mara blinked. Slowly lifted her gaze. 2. Yeah. Red and blue, he said. Said the blue one was tucked under the red one. Joel chuckled nervously. Kids, right. Mara stood. Walked to the window. Snow still dusted the trailhead trees. She smiled, but said nothing. Somewhere out there, he was still walking. Still carrying. Still keeping watch. And somewhere, maybe just beyond the ridge. She was too. Mara didn't talk about the bear. Not fully. She filed her reports. Checked her trails. Wrote down what needed to be written. But she never mentioned the scarf. Never spoke the name Tess out loud in the ranger cabin. Not even when the tourists started whispering about strange sightings again. Local legend, she told them with a quiet shrug. Probably just an old bear from up north. Let them believe what they wanted. Some truths didn't belong on bulletin boards. A week passed. The snow deepened. And Mara returned to routine. Her boots found familiar paths. Her hands moved with muscle memory. But her heart, that was somewhere else now. Still in the basin. Still at the cabin. Still watching him disappear into the trees. The knock came late on a Tuesday. She wasn't expecting anyone. Sun had dipped below the ridge. The station's hallway smelled of pine cleaner and wet wool. She'd just finished logging a winter camping warning when the door rapped once. Firm. Mara opened it. And froze. An older man stood there, maybe in his 60s. Bundled in an olive coat. Snow dusted on his shoulders. A camera bag over one shoulder. He looked tired. But certain. He removed his hat and nodded. Ranger Keene. That's me. I think I saw something I wasn't supposed to. Mara didn't respond right away. She gestured him in. He stepped carefully, scanning the interior like someone half sure he'd wake up. When she offered coffee, he didn't decline. He didn't speak again until he pulled something from his coat pocket, a photograph. Glossy. Fresh. He slid it across the table between them. It showed a bear. Big. Brown. Scarred. Walking across a frozen pond near dusk. But what caught her breath wasn't the bear. It was what was around his neck. 2 scarves. One red. One navy. Tied side by side. Where did you take this? She asked softly. The man hesitated. Off the Blue Hollow Trail. West of Whistler's Fork. I wasn't even looking for anything special. Just tracking some lighting. I like to shoot bears from distance. Keep it natural. He paused. Then looked her square in the eye. But he saw me. Mara nodded slowly. The man leaned in, eyes narrowing slightly. I've been tracking wildlife for 30 years. They look at you, sure. They even remember you sometimes. But this wasn't normal. She said nothing. He continued. He stopped. Stared straight through me. Like I was standing where someone else was supposed to be. Mara folded her hands. What do you want to know? Who tied the second scarf? She looked at the photo again. Thought about the child's report. Joel's laugh. The dream she hadn't dared describe. And then, carefully, she replied. Someone who didn't want him to be alone anymore. The man nodded slowly. After a long silence, he reached into his coat again. Pulled out another item. A second photograph. Older. Faded. This one showed 2 girls sitting on a rock ledge, backs to the camera, a bear-shaped shadow barely visible in the trees behind them. He placed it down gently. "That's from a roll I developed last spring," he said. "Found it in an old camera that got donated to the town archive. No one claimed it." He tapped the photo. "You're one of them, aren't you?" Mara blinked. "No," she said quietly. "That's my sister." The man exhaled, slow and deliberate. "So it's true." Mara looked out the window. Snow fell again. Lightly. "I think he kept a promise," she said. "I think someone needed to believe she wasn't gone, and he never stopped waiting." The man stood, gently sliding both photos back into his coat. He didn't ask for more. Didn't press. At the door, he turned one last time. "I won't share those pictures," he said. "Not unless you say so." She gave a small, grateful nod. "Thank you. I've seen a lot of things in the woods," he added. "But never anything that made me believe in loyalty like that." Then he was gone. That night, Mara pinned the photo of the two scarves inside her locker. Not for show. Not for evidence. Just for her. A reminder that memory wasn't always about words. Sometimes, it was what you carried. And who carried you back. The next day, the snow deepened again. More tourists called in sightings. Each one a little different. One said they saw the bear standing at the edge of the lake. Another claimed it moved alongside their snowmobile trail for 20 minutes before disappearing into fog. But all said the same thing. He was wearing a scarf. And some added a second detail. There was something tied to a branch near where he stood. A blue one. Or maybe red. It was hard to tell. Mara knew then that the forest had started keeping its own stories again. Sharing just enough. With just the right people. And she felt something loosen in her chest. Not loss. Not regret. But peace. She returned to the basin once more that week. Alone. No pack. No gear. Just the notebook she'd taken from the cabin. She added one more page. Not in Tessa's handwriting, but her own. "He never left the forest. But I think she did. Long enough to come back for him. Long enough to tie the second scarf." She left the notebook on the shelf. Closed the door. And walked out without looking back. 2 weeks passed. The weather deepened, colder than usual for early winter. Snow pressed against the glass windows of the ranger station like a secret waiting to be let in. Foot traffic slowed. Reports went quiet. And in the stillness, Mara felt a pull again, not urgent this time. Not driven by grief or wonder. Just a whisper. Like the woods were clearing its throat gently. She knew what it meant. It was time to go back. Not for proof. Not for closure. Just to return, the same way Tess once had, with open hands. She packed only what she needed, a thermos of tea, her sister's notebook, and a long wool scarf, a third one, deep green this time. One Tess had made before she left, but never wore. Mara had kept it in a drawer all these years. It was time the forest had it, too. The trail to the ridge felt different now. Not unfamiliar, but welcoming. The pines no longer loomed. They stood sentinel. The snow no longer weighed heavy. It cushioned. Every step Mara took felt less like a search, and more like a walk towards someone waiting. The bear didn't appear right away. She didn't expect him to. The basin was untouched, no new prints, no fresh markings. But the tree at its center still bore the scars. Still carried Tessa's name etched between claw and thyme. Mara knelt beside it and ran her hand along the bark. Then pulled out the scarf. She tied it gently around the base of the tree, just below the spiral of claw marks. It looked right there. Not bright. Not showy. Just present. She sat for a while on a fallen log, sipping tea. Not thinking. Just listening. To the wind. To the forest. To what was no longer missing. And then she heard it. Not a growl. Not a stomp. Just a soft huff of breath. She turned. He was there. Standing at the edge of the trees. Watching. Same as before. He stepped forward once, slow and steady. No scarf this time. None visible, at least. Mara stood. Didn't speak. She just nodded. Like old friends do. Like you do when a chapter ends and you're both too full of knowing to fill the space with words. The bear walked past the tree. Paused beside the green scarf. Lowered his head briefly. Then moved on, slow, deliberate, toward the western woods. But this time, he wasn't alone. From the trees behind him emerged a smaller figure. At first, Mara thought it was another bear, perhaps a cub or another adult. But the shape was wrong. The fur was lighter. And then she saw the scarf. Navy blue. Wrapped neatly around a thinner neck. Tied the same way Tess had once done. Mara's heart stopped. She took one step forward, not breathing. The creature stepped beside the larger bear, not afraid, not uncertain. Just next to him. And for a second, in the way their shadows fell together on the snow, she saw it. A girl. Thin. Wiry. Hair tangled, face obscured by the scarf. Not quite real. Not quite not. Just there. And then, just as quickly, gone again. Swallowed by distance and snow and trees. Mara stood frozen, blinking hard. She wasn't sure if she'd truly seen it. But it didn't matter. Not now. Because something deep in her chest, something buried under years of cold, had warmed. Not like fire. Like recognition. She turned back to the tree. The three scarves now formed a quiet triangle. Red. Navy. Green. And in that triangle, a story had been written. One not everyone would read. But one the forest would always keep. When Mara made it back to the station, the light had dimmed. Joel was dozing in the radio room. The coffee had gone cold. She walked past the desk, pulled out a marker, and added a new note to the corner of the wall chart. Unknown sighting. Western Ridge. Multiple figures. Observed but unconfirmed. Then, beneath that. Leave it be. No one questioned it. No one erased it. Some truths didn't need signatures. They just needed space. That night, she dreamed again. This time, it wasn't a bear. It wasn't Tess. It was the scarf. Red, fluttering in the snow. Then blue. Then green. Each drifting upward slowly, weightless, like they'd been unknotted by time. They didn't fall. They floated. And somewhere in the woods, a girl's voice whispered. You made it. Mara woke smiling. And for the first time in 12 years. She didn't feel alone. The ranger station was quiet. Even the floorboards didn't creak the same anymore. Mara sat alone at her desk, morning sun creeping through the frost-rimmed window. She had been back from the ridge 3 days now. The green scarf, the shadowy second figure, the silent goodbye, all of it etched inside her, woven into her like the scent of pine in old clothes. She hadn't spoken of what she'd seen. Not to Joel. Not in her reports. Not even in the nightly logs. Some things lived better without ink. But today, she knew she had to write something. Not to explain. Just to remember. She opened the master field log. The one kept in the drawer no one really touched anymore. It was too old. Too full. Too sacred in a strange way. Each entry a flicker of the forest's breath, floods, sightings, blizzards, birthdays, rescues. She flipped to the back. There were 4 blank pages left. She took a deep breath and began. Final sighting entry, Ridge Sector / unofficial basin. I walked farther than I should have. Farther than maps would take me. But I wasn't lost. I was being led. There was a bear. Large. Scarred. Patient. He wore something no animal should, a scarf. Red. Faded. Familiar. I followed him. He did not ask me to. But he allowed it. He led me to a memory. One I didn't know still breathed beneath the snow. My sister, Tess, disappeared 12 winters ago. All we found was her scarf. I found it again. Alongside another. And another after that. I believe she came here. I believe she lived in silence. And I believe something older than grief kept her safe. I don't know what it means. But I know the bear never left. And now, I think, she didn't either. Mara capped the pen. Closed the log. Slid it back into the drawer with care. Not because she needed it hidden. But because she needed it held. By the wood. By the station. By the forest itself. Later that day, Joel came in from trail duty. Dropped snow across the entry mat. Shrugged off his jacket. Anything new? He asked, sipping a thermos. Mara shook her head. Just winter doing what it does. Tourists keep asking about the scarf bear, he smirked. You think that's gonna stick as a legend? She smiled faintly. Maybe. Joel paused. You never said what you think it all means. Mara looked out the window. The pines swayed slowly in the breeze. There's more to these woods than we'll ever log, she said. Sometimes, the only way to understand something is to leave it where it belongs. Joel blinked. Poetic. She didn't answer. Just went back to her notes. That evening, she walked to the edge of the forest one more time. No backpack. No radio. Just a scarf, navy this time, folded gently in her coat. She tied it to the low branch of a pine tree where the forest met the trail. No signs. No words. Just a quiet offering. A 4th thread in the fabric they'd all woven. Red. Blue. Green. Now navy. The wind caught the edge and flicked it once like a wave. And somewhere far off, so far she thought she imagined it, a single deep breath echoed between the trees. Back in the station, she wrote one last note in her personal log. Not in the official book. Not for records. Just for her. The bear was never lost. He just remembered what she couldn't leave behind. And now, so do I. That night, the snow came heavier. Blanketing every trail, every branch, every sign of what once was. But when the wind stilled, just for a moment, anyone standing at the edge of the trees might have seen them. 4 scarves. Dancing slightly. Like memories you thought were gone. And farther in, among the pines. A figure moved. Massive. Silent. Carrying no sound, only story.